genes.
We're done with the reproduction section. We're moving into now genetics. They're sort of combined into one unit. So when we talk about genetics, the word comes from genes. What are our genes? What does that mean?
They make up you.
What is that? How?
Well, like they're like the building, your DNA, your building blocks. They make up of your body and your skin and your muscles and your. I don't know how to describe it. Just they make up you, your personality and your traits. And it's hard to explain.
What were you gonna say, Angela? Okay, they come from parents. Our genes. When we talk about genes, we're talking about our DNA. We inherit our DNA from our parents. As we just learned when we're talking about karyotypes and so forth, meiosis, reproduction, fertilization, half of our chromosomes that are in each of our cells came from one parent, and the other half came from the other parent. So we're a mixture of those traits. And our genes, we just mentioned DNA. It's our DNA. In all the cells of our body, we have chromosomes which have our DNA we inherited from our parents. And that DNA has in it is a code that tells basically how to build us. Our appearance is determined almost 100% by our DNA, by the chromosomes that we inherited from our parents. Other factors about how our body makes proteins and hormones, that's spelled out very specifically in our genes, in our DNA. Some other things are a little more complicated. Not everything about us comes from our DNA, comes from our genes. Other things also come into play, our environment, things we're exposed to, outside factors. So when we talk about genetics, we're talking about the study of heredity. If I say something is hereditary, what am I saying?
They're like runs in the family.
Yeah, it's passed on through the generations. And what gets passed on in generations? Our DNA. Right? My DNA came from my parents. Their DNA came from their parents. So we inherit our traits, our genes, through this process.
Does it always have to come from parents?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. There's other things that influence, and sometimes we can inherit traits that we don't see in our parents, but they were still there in the genes, but just not present. So scientists, people have known that offspring look like their parents or have the appearance of their parents, or that some diseases could be inherited. But as science learned more about living things, people started to look for patterns within the DNA, within inheritance. One of the first people to do that was this guy, Gregor Mendel. He was Austrian. He was a monk, a religious person, lived in a monastery, but his hobby was that he liked to grow plants. And he actually gave us some of our first ideas about the patterns of how genes are inherited. He experimented extensively with pea plants. Yeah, he grew thousands and thousands of plants. This is his notebook. And what he did is he kept very, very careful records. He would take a plant, for example. Here's some of the traits he was looking at in the pea plants. He was looking at the shape of the seeds, the color, the flower color, the color of the pod, the shape of the pod, and so forth. And what he would do is he would take one parent plant and record all of its traits very carefully. And then take the other parent, record the traits. He would use a little brush to get pollen grains from the flower of one plant and then pollinate the other plant with it. So he could actually cross this plant with this plant, grow it, grow the seeds just like we did back there, and see what the offspring are like. Plants reproduce sexually. There's two parents. An egg is fertilized by a sperm cell. You grow the embryo, which is a seed, and you can see the characteristics. And because they grow pretty quickly, he could do this over and over and over again. And he started to see some patterns. And his patterns that he discovered, this is in the 1800s, basically we know still hold true today. He gave us the background, the mathematical background about genetics. People kind of forgot about his research, however. And they didn't really rediscover it until 60 or 70 years later. Thomas Morgan he did some really important research on fruit flies. If you ever take a genetics class, like in college, my daughter is taking genetics right now. It's her hardest class she's taking. But she has a little bunch of fruit flies that she has to go in the lab. They have to feed them, they'll raise them, doing different things, because fruit flies are kind of like pea plants. They have a lot of very clear characteristics. They reproduce really quickly, so they're used as an example in genetics classes all the time. You take a red-eyed fruit fly, cross it with a black-eyed fruit fly, you look at their offspring, and you can see some of these things. He basically confirmed that what Mendel found with plants also applies to animals. Then these are yes, Mr. McCoy.
When my daughter had poison dart frogs, so when she was away at college, I took care of them, and we had to raise fruit flies. And the ones they send you from the pet supply place are wingless.
Okay, yeah.
But if a normal fruit fly gets in there, that trait is dominant.
Oh, interesting.
So if that happens, like all of a sudden one day you open the jar to feed the frogs and fruit flies.
Does that happen sometimes?
It happened occasionally.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and like they have very clear traits, like dominant, recessive, and you can predict
fast.
What's that?
It happens fast.
Yeah, they go through very, very fast generations. This is Watson and Crick, famous scientists. They won the Nobel Prize. They discovered DNA, the structure of a DNA molecule, what it looks like, how all the parts are linked together. We'll learn about this as well. They actually used also X-ray images from Rosalind Franklin, who was a female scientist, who they used her work as well to help them figure that out. So over time, we've learned a lot about DNA and genes. And this is, like I said, one of the first organisms that helped us to do that, the pea plants. And so we'll use pea plants as an example here. So what Mendel figured out after doing all these crossbreeding experiments with pea plants is that there are some traits, some versions of a trait that what he said were dominant. A dominant version of a trait is one that you could almost think about it is the one that will show through most if there's two versions. So when we're talking about traits, like if we talk about eye color, we could say we have several genes for eye color. They give us our different eye colors. And there's different versions of eye color, right? There are blue versions of eye color. There's brown, there's green, there's hazel. Those versions, we call those things alleles. An allele is like a version of something. Like you could have an allele for brown hair or blonde hair, or red hair or black hair. An allele just means a version. So sometimes these versions, these alleles are dominant, while others are recessive. And if an organism has one of the dominant versions, that's the one that shows through. The recessive, which is the other one, kind of gets hidden away. It's still there in the genes, but it doesn't actually show through. So for example, when Gregor Mendel took these pea plants, and he had one pea plant that he knew was tall. It had pure genes for being a tall plant. And then he took another plant that he knew was a pure short plant, and he bred them together. What do you think the offspring were like? Most people's first thing they want to say is medium. They weren't. They weren't medium. They were all tall. So why would all these plants be tall? You bred a tall one with a short one. The reason is because the allele for a tall pea plant, the gene that's in the DNA, that's the dominant trait. So if the dominant trait is there, that's the one that shows through. So you guys probably did Punnett squares like this back in junior high, 7th grade? Okay. So when we use symbols lots of times to represent different traits, different alleles. If we're talking about a dominant allele, we typically use a capital letter. When we're talking about the recessive version, we use a lowercase letter. So let's look at Mendel's example. So he had a tall plant. It was pure tall. We're going to use a capital T to represent that. So his pure tall plant had a big T. We're going to use a big T to represent that. Had a big T allele and a big T allele. The short plant that he had, what do you think it had?
Small S.
So usually you might think, well, we should use an S, it's short, but typically what we do is we actually use the same letter, but we just use lowercase version. So the short plant is a little t and a little t. Those are the two alleles that it had. And to figure out what the offspring might be like, we use this model. It's called a Punnett square. We put one parent's genes on the top, call that their genotype. Big T, big T. We put the other parent, their alleles go on the side. Little t, little t. And then we fill in the boxes according to where these things all connect. So what's going to go in this box? What's it get from up here? Big T from the top. What's it get from the side? Little t. This box, same thing. Big T from the top, little t from the side. This one's pretty simple. Jim, you got to write this down. We're on the next slide. Okay, so what is this telling us? So if they have so if this tall plant and this short plant have offspring, what are they going to be like? They're going to be all tall. But it's got a little t in there. But little t is the recessive allele. It doesn't show through. It's kind of hidden. So all of these plants actually turn out to be tall. Okay. We call their physical appearance their phenotype. It's how it shows through. Okay. Well, then what Mendel did is he said, all right, what if I take two of these plants and I breed them together?
What? Okay.
So we can do the same thing. Another Punnett square showing these two parents. So let's do that. One parent's alleles go on the top. Big T and a little t. The other parent's alleles go on the side. Big T, little t. Go ahead and fill in the Punnett square. You can.
Is it just two T's with the top one?
Well, they're all T. Yeah, they're all T's, but big T, little t, big T, little t. Make sure you make your letters distinct so that it's clear what's a big T, what's a little t.
Time.
What's gonna go here?
Big T, big T.
A big T from the top, big T from the side. What's that plant gonna be like?
Big.
Tall or short? Tall. What's going to go in this square?
Big T, big T.
Little t and big T. Typically, we write the big T first for some reason.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter really. Yeah, big T, little t. How about down here?
Big T, little
Big T,
Yeah, big T, little T.
little t. And finally, okay. We're going to understand how we did that.
We always.
So, but what is this telling me now?
Yeah.
This is what's important. So what does that mean? Mostly. Can we give an exact percentage?
No.
Well, we can predict.
75%.
Yes, what we would say is that chances are 75% that the offspring will be what? Tall. And 25% chance they're going to be short. Because 1 out of 4 boxes, this is the only one that would end up being short. The only way you end up with a short pea plant is if you get 2 of the recessive alleles, like this. Tall, 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 short. So 75% would be tall, 25% would be short. And that's what Mendel saw when he did this. If he took 100 seeds from those 2 plants and he grew them all, he found consistently about 75% would be tall, 25% of those plants would be short, and that's what got him thinking that this is how these things are inherited. All right, a little bit more vocabulary.
How would it be like medium?
Yeah, so good question, Angelina. So it depends. So for pea plants, they're kind of either tall or short. There's not an in-between version. But we'll be talking about maybe tomorrow. Well, so there's lots of traits, like, for example, eye color. Right? Eye color is not just, you have blue eyes or brown eyes. There's like all the in-betweens. And that's a different type of inheritance. It's not just dominant recessive. But good question.
Tell them what color my eyes are.
So just a couple more terms. They're in this box. We'll use these terms in the next several things. When we say that an organism is homozygous, what that means is it has 2 of the same alleles. So for example, this one is homozygous dominant. It's got 2 of the big T's. This one is homozygous recessive. It's got 2 little t's. And then heterozygous means it has 2 different alleles, a big T and a little t. All right, let's, let me go back for a minute. You got some space here on your slide? All right. I'm gonna give you let's talk about flower color. Let's do another example. So flower color in peas also has just a dominant allele and a recessive allele. Purple is the dominant allele.
Sorry, right
The
there.
other version is white, which is the recessive allele. So down here, I want you to do a Punnett square of, okay, I'm going to say a pure purple flower pea plant crossed with pure white. So go ahead and set up a Punnett square showing that to me. Are we going to use T's anymore?
No.
What are we going to use?
T's.
T's. Because we use usually the first letter of the dominant trait. So pure purple and a pure white. Go ahead and do the Punnett square, please. Go ahead, Julie.
Oh, sorry.
I supposed to put big peas in two sections on top and then small peas on the side?
Yep. I'll walk you through it here. All right. Let's look at how we do this. So a pure purple plant, pure purple plant. What letters are we going to use for a pure purple plant? They're all P's, but give me capital lowercase.
Capital.
2 capital P's, right. This is the purple one. Angelina, what am I going to use for this pure white one?
W.
We always use the same letter though, Andrew.
P.
Yep, but what kind of P?
A little.
Lowercase, because white is recessive. I just showed you that. So like a letter like P, I got to be careful because I'm not very neat. So I usually write the lowercase cursive like this, just so I know it's different than the uppercase P. All right. What's going to be in this box? Top left. Uppercase P from here. What's it get from the side? Lowercase P. How about here? Yeah. They're all the same thing, right, Angela? So what are the offspring going to be like?
Purple.
They're all purple. It's the same situation we had here. They were all tall. It's just using a different trait. They're all purple. All right, I'm going to give you one more here. I'm going to use some different words. What if I cross a heterozygous, we're talking about purple still, heterozygous plant crossed with a homozygous recessive plant? I'm going to make this a little more challenging. Now you got to figure some stuff out. So use this little box, might be helpful. Still using P's.
Sorry.
Because we're still talking about purple and
Let's just
white.
heterozygous.
Heterozygous, yep, and heterozygous.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Tried a different way.
What's this term mean? Heterozygous. Two different alleles, right. So we're still using P's. So big P, what else?
Big
Little p.
Oh,
Heterozygous means two different, so that has one of each. Okay, homozygous recessive. Homozygous, two of the same. Recessive means it must be the lowercase version. All right, that's how our Punnett square should be set up. What goes in this box? Oops, that's little. This,
See.
So it's kind of like a 50% chance.
yes, let's put that in. So Angela said 50% chance. Good. Of what?
Oh, but it could be big or small.
There's a fifth. Well, now we're not talking about big or small. We're talking about
Oh, it's the same percent.
purple white.
Oh.
So, what percent of these offspring are going to have purple flowers?
50%.
Half of them. What percent will have white flowers? Okay. Now let me give you What percent of the offspring would be homozygous dominant?
None of them.
75. Wait.
I heard every possible answer. Who's confident in their answer? Why, Francesca?
Because
What does homozygous dominant mean, Francesca?
it means that there's two big P's.
Right.
There's no two big P's.
None of them. Homozygous means the same. Dominant means two big P's. None of them have that.
That's a really bad P.
Sorry, it's a little lollipop.
That's supposed to be you.
That's a flag. This is the moon. All right. Anyway,
Wait, let me take a picture. Hold on.
what? All right, we're gonna do some practice.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, let's do these two videos. Let's do a video first. Then we'll come back to our practice. Okay. Is this sounding familiar from 7th grade?
No.
No?
No.
Yes.
I COVID. We were online.
So that means you didn't learn anything?
No.
Yeah, that's actually true. It's just relaxed. Well, it's not gonna be-
Good thing we're back in person.
Yeah, it is.